the impact of a one-time tax does not solve an ongoing structural challenge that has been exacerbated by the impacts of H.R. 1.
It's not a millionaire tax, it's a billionaire tax. And the idea would be, I guess, to use that revenue in order to offer improvements for the average Californian.
Worth debating. Why pick $1 billion? Why in Washington did you pick $1 million? Why don't you pick 999,999? Why not pick 500,000? Why pick 5%? Why not 6? Why not 10? Why not 20? Why not 50? The thing is, it's all arbitrary just to attack people that we hate. And it is not for the public benefit. In California, the state auditor just found $70 billion in fraud going on in the state. The reason they need a wealth tax is to cover up the fraud. The hole in the budget in California is due to fraud. That's why they're trying to tax these people.
No, but you just admitted that it was about in every state in the union.
70 billion?
You know, it is always satisfying to watch Democrat politicians get consumed by the Leviathan that is their own radicalized voter base, the very voter base that they cultivated, by the way. And today is no exception as it pertains to the newly proposed California wealth tax on billionaires that may go into effect as a ballot proposition in the upcoming election. You may have heard of this already, but this is essentially another attempt for progressives to tax the rich in an economically illiterate manner. And understandably, it's being heavily supported by the left-wing voter base in California. Except at the 11th hour, Gavin Newsom has now come out and is desperately begging for it not to pass, basically arguing that an unrealized capital gains tax on the wealthiest people in our state is actually a terrible idea because it will simply cause the wealthiest people to leave our state. Yes, this is actually what Gavin Newsom, of all people, is arguing. We'll talk about that in a second. But of course, progressives may counter by saying, well, that's exactly what we want. Tax the rich. We hate the billionaires. Yeah, get them out of there. Except the problem is, it's not just them that will leave. It is their money. It is the jobs they bring. It is the investment they bring. Ironically, you may even see an overall reduction in tax revenue as a result of this tax, because after all, what happens when the people already paying the most taxes are now no longer around to pay those taxes? You don't have money. Where are you going to get the money from? Ironically, in the end, usually comes from the middle class, and it turns out California is currently doing something about that as well. We'll talk about that. But again, this is actually the argument that Gavin Newsom is making. To which I say, on the surface, I completely agree with. That's the exact argument I would make against a stupid idea like this. But at the same time, progressives may have a point in the sense that, Gavin, aren't you supposed to be left-wing? Isn't this what you're all about? I thought taxing the billionaires is good, right? The 1%. It's the greedy corporations who are stealing from America. And yet in the end, it sounds like the argument here you're making is a lot like trickle-down economics, right? This is the right-wing case as to why high taxes, and especially even high taxes on the rich, are usually not a good idea. Yet we see Gavin Newsom making that case. And so it goes without saying that a lot of progressives in California don't appear to be happy with him. They're not really listening to him. But furthermore, I'd even point out that this will likely be used against him by other progressive candidates in the 2028 election who will argue he is essentially not adequately liberal enough. But nonetheless, we'll tell you all about this here today, right? I want to break down the California wealth tax. I want to show you what Gavin is saying about it to the rebellion of other left-wingers out there, and even show you how apparently in the end, understanding, hey, maybe the governor's not on board with this. Let's just tax the middle class instead. Everybody, welcome to California. We'll get into all of it, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all the latest news and coverage. And that said, let us start by kind of introducing for you just the details of exactly what this wealth tax purports to do. So the 2026 Billionaire Tax Act is a potential California ballot initiative that, if passed, would impose a one-time 5% wealth tax on residents with a net worth of $1 billion or more. Keep in mind, this is not an income tax. This would, as a matter of fact, target assets such as stocks, bonds, privately held businesses, cash deposits, art collectibles, etc. Essentially, 5% of your net worth you have to pay. And the understandable result of this has been what? Already we're starting to see the signs that billionaires are not just threatening to leave the state, they're already leaving the state and taking their money with them. Take a listen.
It's the California gold rush in reverse. Google co-founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin, just the latest tech billionaires eyeing a move out of the Golden State.
I think a lot of other people will leave. It's probably half the total wealth that the budget estimated would be available to be taxed will be gone.
According to the Times, Page and Brin alone have either terminated or moved a combined 60 LLCs out of the state where they made their fortune. They say it's thanks to a possible ballot measure that would enact a one-time 5% tax on billionaires' net worth. Backers still need to gather 875,000 signatures before it makes the November ballot, but plutocrats are already worried.
If you've heard about the billionaire 5% tax rate out of California, you should be very, very concerned.
Billionaires suck and they will try to divide us.
It's being pushed by a union of healthcare workers who say the funds raised are crucial to save the state's failing healthcare system and other programs facing federal cuts, especially after the big beautiful bill's tax breaks.
The benefit from this tax is going to outweigh, maybe a couple people moving out of the state. And if we don't do anything right now, we are going to see our hospitals close. We are going to see ERs close. And so that's really what this billionaire tax is about.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think you just heard a pretty glaring admission of what this proposed tax is really about, right? It's a desperate attempt to save the failing finances of the state of California after, for years now, billions of dollars just straight up is being stolen and frauded from the state. Whether that's public works like the high-speed rail or welfare programs, which are being massively frauded day and night, and of course, even the healthcare system that they're citing. We talked about on this channel how the Medicaid system of California, aka Medi-Cal, is actually operating at huge financial losses. They're in a deficit right now, specifically because of all of the free healthcare they were giving to illegal aliens. And we were trying to tell people, right? It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not made up. Free stuff for illegals is actually bankrupting the state of California, as is the welfare fraud, as are many of these other problems. California is not alone. We know the story in Minnesota. We know the story in many other blue states, and you wonder why they're all having these budget problems in 25 and 26. This is the reason. As I so often point out, woke politics is a very convenient excuse for money laundering, crime, and fraud. It just is, right? It's very easy to say, oh, our state is struggling with finances because we're not taxing the rich enough, so we need to tax the rich in order to help the ordinary person. But in reality, what's actually happening? You lost so much due to fraud, you need to find a new source of revenue, likely so that way you can pay off a lot of the fraud and then obviously in the end just keep on committing fraud. So don't lose sight of the fact that's what's really going on here. Okay, that's the reason this has been proposed. That said, I do want to explain some of the obvious problems with the proposed wealth tax. First and foremost, it's the fact that you're talking about an unrealized capital gains tax. And what does that mean? In other words, they're proposing here to tax money that doesn't actually exist. Because notably, right, when you're talking about the net worth of billionaires, as one example, let's just hypothetically say you Google the net worth of a fictional billionaire named Elonius Muskrat, and it says on Google, oh, he's worth $18 billion. A lot of random progressives seem to believe that means he literally has $18 billion in his bank that he's just hiding and hoarding from everyone and doesn't want to share, and he's a greedy capitalist. But in reality, no, that's not actually what that means, right? Net worth is a combination of not just cash, but also your assets. So think things like houses, investments, stocks, a lot of times, companies that they own. All of this together combined is worth, let's say, for example, $18 billion. And so the problem with just saying, oh, pay us 5% of your $18 billion net worth is very likely, in most cases, these billionaires don't actually have that cash on hand. That cash doesn't exist, right? You're talking about things that are owned or stored in other places, and it's not liquid physical cash. And so likely, first of all, actually problem number one, let's point out with that. First of all, net worth is not even a concrete number, right? It's a valuation, it's an estimate, and it can be disputed as to what your real net worth is. So I can see that as problem number one. A billionaire in the state of California are not even going to agree on what their net worth is because, hey, right? How much is that house worth? How much is this company worth? Like, these are estimates and they can sell at different prices. So who knows what that even means? But then, of course, secondly here, okay? So likely they're going to have to, say, liquidate their assets, sell off their stocks, sell off their companies. That can cause, by the way, severe financial problems and economic problems for the wider people who work for those companies, sell off their houses. It's just taxing money here again that doesn't even exist. Now, you may even counter by saying, well, what about property tax? Isn't that the same thing? You're taxing money that wasn't actually made. It's an unrealized capital gains tax. The answer there is actually yes. But of course, as it pertains to someone like Gavin Newsom, he claims to be against the rich, but in reality, it's like, okay, well, the middle class is fine. So we can just keep on raising unrealized capital gains tax on the middle class. But Gavin's going to draw the line, right? As it pertains to, the billionaires and the rich people. That, in the end, when you think about it, he actually kind of serves. But anyways, that said, so that's problem number one. Problem number two, quite obviously, is just that people are going to say, I don't want to pay that. I don't want to give up 5% of my wealth. I'm just going to move to another state, which you're already watching. That is why Gavin Newsom right here is going out and essentially stating these very arguments, right? In an interview with Bloomberg Newsweek, for one example, Gavin Newsom said that the tax could end up hurting the state in the long term. The fact is, it will actually reduce investments in education. It will reduce investments in teachers, librarians, and healthcare. It will reduce investments in firefighting and police, because after all, it's going to reduce overall tax revenue, right?
It will put us in a very uncompetitive position. And I think there's some evidence to bear proof to that. And this particular initiative is just really badly drafted in the context of supporting all those other causes that I hold dear, that I've been advocating for, that I've been supporting and promoting: expanded child care, and preschool for all, and the work I'm doing, high-dose tutoring and community schools. Those are not included in this. And I just think that's a substance abuse treatment is not, housing is not. And so those things matter. And so on every level, so I just expressed that. I can't solve for everything. I just raised $118 million on Prop 50. So
yeah, again, on the substance, he's not wrong. When he says that it's going to long-term reduce the tax base of California because the rich are going to leave, he is correct. When he forecasts that you will see economic damage as a result of it, he's correct. After all, countries the liberals often celebrate, such as Canada or the EU countries, say, oh, look how amazing they are. They're liberal. They have social services. Okay, it's worth noting that those economies are all basically collapsing right now, right? GDP per capita used to be neck and neck with the United States, in some cases higher as it pertains to Canada. Now, ever since 2015 or so, those numbers have inverted. The U.S. economy keeps growing. Those economies have stagnated and flatlined. Why? Couple different reasons. Immigration sure is also one of them. Hey, liberals feel a certain way about that. But it's further just because, the crushing effect that high taxes, high regulation, this anti-corporate, anti-billionaire, anti-business mentality is just long-term not good for the economy. It causes stagnation. It discourages growth. All of these things, yes, are absolutely true. But it's also a prime example of how Gavin Newsom doesn't actually believe in anything. Because aren't those the ideas you celebrate? Is this are those not the countries, for example, that you support? You just went to Davos, Switzerland, and encouraged all of them to stand up to Donald Trump, and yet here you are sounding like a right-winger. Why? Why is that? Thought you're supposed to be a liberal. Is it because, by the way, the billionaires of California are now lobbying you to come out against it, which is likely true, right? Like, Gavin, what do you actually believe? Because here was him just a couple weeks ago speaking about how, much it was unsustainable that the billionaires own so much in America, and yet he clearly doesn't want to do anything about it. That's very interesting.
We have a party that I think needs to design and develop a compelling economic vision for the future where people feel included, to reconcile the fact that if we don't democratize our economy, we're not going to save democracy. And I don't think it's healthy that we have 10% of people that own 2/3 the wealth in this country. I don't think it's sustainable practice. The folks watching Mr. Beast, disproportionately 30-year-olds, the first generation in history not doing better than their parents. There's some underlying issues here that have to be addressed. We have an economy that is broken for too many people.
Yeah, well, if it's such a problem that the people at the top own the most wealth, then why don't you do something about it? Why don't you actually democratize the economy as you claim? I mean, isn't this all what the left-wing fantasy is all about? Redistributing wealth? Well, anyways, that said, let's now show you what the California electorate thinks about this, because no matter how much Gavin Newsom tries to say, okay, look, we as a Democrat Party, we as liberals and left-wingers should be like 5% less crazy, they're saying, no, full steam ahead. We're bitterly resentful. We're angry people. We're hateful. We're trying to take it out on someone. And in this case, it's going to be the billionaires. And according to them, they don't even care if it's destroying their own state. They want to do it, I guess, just for love of the game, which to me is a pretty open admission that leftists know they're destroying civilization. They really don't care. But apparently, as it reads here from Fox Business, California voters appear ready to drive the state's remaining billionaires toward the exit signs. And many say they're fully aware of the potential consequences. So they already know what's going to happen and they want it to happen anyway. Tells you a lot, right? Here it is, though. A new survey found that 60% of likely voters back a one-time wealth tax, even as a majority of those same respondents say the move would spark a business exodus and cost local jobs. So these people admitted, we understand the consequences, we should do it anyway. Why? How's it actually going to benefit anything? Oh, it'll increase public funding. First of all, no, it won't. And secondly, in the context of California, what does that even mean? Because California already has some of the highest income tax brackets in America, right? The top tax bracket on the rich, the 1% over there, is 13%, which means combined with federal taxes, right? If you're a relatively wealthy person in California, you are paying 50% of your income in taxes, which to me is absurd. I don't care how much money you make. Half of your money doesn't even belong to you. That's crazy, right? But apparently, that's not enough. It is what it is. This is what the electorate is saying. Gavin Newsom, enjoy your state then. We can't do this. California's going to collapse. Well, the people will get as what they ask because you're all supporting democracy after all, right? Now, so if the people vote for their own destruction and they're Democrats, they're liberals, we've democratized it as much as possible. You don't even have to show photo ID to vote there, and that's what they vote for, then there you have it. Like, what's the problem? Anyways, the February 2026 survey highlights what it describes as a contradiction, with 52% of respondents saying that the tax will likely cost jobs and drive entrepreneurs out of California. But even when presented with the full battery of economic risks, so essentially they explained and told to them the exact economics lesson we gave them, support of the wealth tax remains still at 54%, according to the survey. The data also suggests that some Golden State voters prioritize perceived fairness over economic concerns. In other words, equity over having a functional economy is their argument, right? Social justice over having food to eat. Well, that's kind of the historical belief of radical left-wingers, so that shouldn't be surprising. But with 42% expressing worries about potential fallout in Silicon Valley and 48% concerned about long-term revenue instability. Well, gee, you don't say. You're a state heavily reliant on Silicon Valley and Hollywood and, capital in general for your roads, your schools, all those things. But apparently you think it's a good idea to, of course, drive them out of the state. And they're admitting that's exactly what it's all about, So I don't know what to say other than at this point, I guess you kind of just got to root for Californians to get exactly what they voted for. We know what the long-term economic impact of this is going to be. Gavin Newsom, of course, loves to brag about how, well, you say liberalism doesn't work, but look, California has the biggest GDP. And as I so often point out to people, well, it was like that before you got there, right? California being economically prosperous or the most populated state in America long predates Democrats actually taking control of California. It was actually a Republican state under the boom, whether it's from the Dust Bowl migration or the post-1950s, post-war stuff, right? California always had a bunch of advantages. And then essentially, they already gave you the keys to the Ferrari. Democrats are crashing it and still saying, well, look, we have a Ferrari. You didn't build that. You didn't create that. And as I often make the point, given population trends over the next several decades, that is going to inverse itself very soon, right? Red states in the South historically were poorer than northern states and western states like California, right? But the trend is starting to go like this for a reason. They're catching up to you for a reason. And apparently you want to accelerate that even further. So we'll find out, right? I'd love to see how Gavin Newsom's whole GDP argument holds up, in the future, because it's just one of the dumbest things that, frankly, leftists ever say. Oh, well, if Republicans are so good, then why are blue states the richest and red states are poor? Well, okay, Texas and Florida are catching up to you very quickly. You can be arrogant now. Give it literally 5 to 10 years, okay? You're not even going to be there. So keep yapping, man, in the words of Joe Biden. But anyways, that said, So now that we understand wealthy people are fleeing the state, and that's been happening for some time, of course, what always happens when left-wingers run out of rich people to tax? They start taxing the middle class, which really is the story of living in California. And at the same time, where we're talking about this proposed billionaire tax, but now Gavin Newsom is coming out against it, the state legislature in California, folks, this is very important, I want to point this out to people, is already moving forward with a proposed mileage tax. In other words, taxing the amount of miles you drive in your car. My understanding is private jets will be exempt from this. Take a listen.
So the people here protesting against ICE have absolutely no idea that their rights were completely violated yesterday by the California state legislature. In the assembly, the Democrats, by a simple majority vote, voted to advance a potential per mile tax. Yeah, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's not a rumor. They just tasked a California Transportation Commission to come up with recommendations by 2027 to be able to implement a per mile tax that would charge you 2 to 9 cents for every single mile that you drive. And you know why that's insane? Because we're talking about families of 2 or maybe even 3 paying an extra of $1,200 to $4,200 every single year just to drive, depending on how that estimation ends up coming out. So you are going to be punished by the government for needing to fulfill work and familial obligations.
Yep, so now realizing that taxing the billionaires may not work, as the old saying goes, right? Socialism only works until you run out of other people's money. Okay, well, when you have no more rich people around to tax, what are they doing? Taxing the middle class. In a state, by the way, where basically everyone who works a physical job has to drive to work. Okay, we're not talking about New York City where you can just take the subway, bro. Yeah, California, especially Southern California, just does not work that way. Okay, so there you have it. But after all, what else is to be expected? You know, you have to pay more taxes on your car, middle class, single mother, whatever it is, because don't you know, Gavin Newsom needs his high-speed rail. Illegal aliens need their health care. You better pay taxes on your car. Yeah, well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The most mask off as it can get, And apparently, Newsom is saying, oh, don't tax the rich, right? That's a bad idea. But quietly, I still need to raise money for my welfare fraud. So let me, pass that tax burden onto middle-class Californians. There you have it. That's California for you. What have they done, by the way, already? Keep in mind, you're talking about a state already with like some of the highest taxes in the country. And what do they have to show for it? Crumbling roads, crumbling infrastructure, an incompetent state government, and a ton of debt, right? And instead of saying, hey, maybe we should be more financially responsible, no, they just want to raise taxes instead. And, the progressives think, oh, well, we're talking about taxing the rich. They have more than enough to share. Well, enjoy when now they're literally saying, nope, I guess that's not going to work. We're going to move the tax burden onto you. Yeah, have fun with that. Yeah. And then keep voting Democrat, by the way. This is your ideology, too, so I don't see the problem, right? You support high taxes. Oh, not on yourself? Okay. But don't you support also climate change regulations? Well, there you go, Climate change. Okay, so enjoy paying taxes on the car then. What? I don't want that to affect me. No, this is your ideology. You ought to live by it. So there you go. There you go. I don't know. Anyways, that said, though, guys, let me know your thoughts on this entire situation in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.